Secondly, I heard also someone suggest that he had a flight instructor with him because he is working on an instrument rating. And that's how you work on an instrument rating. You fly with a certified flight instructor who sits in the right seat. You sit in the left seat and as you normally would, and you fly, and the instructor's there to guide you and to take over, frankly, if you get into any trouble. So those could be the two reasons. There was some suggestion or speculation that he might have had a flight instructor.
Let's take these two reasons one at a time. The second one first. Kennedy was working on his instrument rating, but he had passed the written exam. He had passed the performance evaluation, but he needed to log hours, so that he had every reason to fly with an instructor and no reason to fly without one. And now let's get back to that first point.
Somebody originally said that he had a flight instructor because he was concerned about the cast on his leg.
In fact, Kennedy had the cast removed from his ankle the day before, but he was still on crutches. He did not need his feet to fly, but he did need them to move the plane around while it was on the ground. Flying with the injury was not impossible or even dangerous, but it was inconvenient. And what do millionaires like John buy with their money? They buy convenience. It would have been much more convenient for John to have a flight instructor along. But we're just getting started with his foot injury. You see, lots of people who cared about John were worried about him flying with a broken foot. It may not have been a real threat. You don't need your feet to fly, but it was an obvious problem that easily attracted people's attention. The Boston Globe for July 19th quotes a Canadian business associate who says that John told him that, for the time being, he'd rather fly with a co-pilot because his broken foot made it difficult for him to operate the pedals controlling the rudder. Richard Blow, his friend and co-editor at George Magazine, had lunch with John on Friday afternoon, the day of the crash. Blow describes their lunchtime conversation and says that he told John he was worried about him flying with the injured ankle. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm flying with an instructor." And what do you think his wife is going to say? Here you have a guy on crutches because he crashed his mini-plane 3 weeks before. Every time Carolyn looked at him, what did she see? She sees a guy on crutches because he crashed his mini-plane 3 weeks before. How likely is it, do you suppose, that his wife is going to get on his plane with him without a professional pilot on board? You do the math. Ask any married man if you need help. The chances of her getting on that plane are a lot less than zero. It is incontrovertible that in the last seconds before takeoff, Kennedy may in fact have taken on a flight instructor. How can anyone say for certain that he didn't until the wreckage and the flight log were recovered? Oh wait, they claim they didn't recover the flight log. That means there's no official record of who was on the plane. And it's well recognized that in ocean disasters, just because they didn't find your body doesn't mean you weren't there. For example, when they finally located the wreckage, the Coast Guard and the Navy scoured the bottom for every piece of available evidence. Thousands of small pieces were recovered. Nevertheless, in spite of their search, one of the seats is missing. This seat wasn't eaten or dragged off by sharks. It's rather extraordinary that it should be missing since all the other seats were trapped in the wreckage. How did this one get loose, and how did it get away? A minor point, maybe. The major point is this. If a large, durable, inedible piece of the plane is missing, why not a body, which could certainly have been dragged off and eaten in the 5 days that it took to recover the bodies? So, strictly speaking, Without the official flight log showing who was on the plane, even today it would be irresponsible for anyone to try to state definitively that there was no flight instructor on board that plane. We cannot say for sure. We just don't know. Radwell may have been only guessing that John Kennedy Jr. had a flight instructor on the plane, but her guess is supported by an enormous amount of evidence. And while Radwell could not have known for certain that there was a flight instructor, the likelihood that John would have had a professional pilot on board is overwhelming. So then why did all the news reporters, every one, throw out Radwell's story in favor of one that could not be verified then and cannot be verified even now? Oswald was arrested because he matched a description that came from out of nowhere. Unseen forces, invisible to us even today, infiltrated the Dallas police and planted this description. Who, calling themselves the family, told the outright lie that John did not have the necessary license to fly, and at the very same time began spreading the utterly baseless story that there was no flight instructor. And why did all the news accept this baseless story? Are you starting to detect a dark presence at work here? The lying of Colonel Rourke, the FAA saying that they didn't get any of the many phone calls the family made, the incredible 15-hour delay in sending search craft to the crash site, the mass of other missing pieces. This information is disturbing for what it suggests. It smells really bad, but the outline of what's really going on is far from clear. Let's see if we can sharpen the picture to get a better view of what's going on and who's involved. In their final report, a year after the accident, the NTSB featured the dramatic story that one of John's flight instructors had offered to fly with him, but that Kennedy told him that, quote, he wanted to do it alone. This story dominated the news about the final report, as well it might. Stories of Kennedys killing themselves are red meat for the press. They love it. Another Kennedy turns out to be a careless, irresponsible, stupid bastard who killed himself and his lovely wife. Too bad about her. But wait a minute. If this is such hot stuff, and it is, how come it didn't come out in the days right after the crash? The government did a better job than the media in digging up this story. That's a little strange, isn't it? I can answer that question. Yes, it is. So maybe we need to have a closer look at where this story comes from. ABC, the LA Times, and everybody else got their information from the NTSB final report. But this doesn't tell us very much. For example, who is this second CFI? What did he say, and when did he say it? Well, the Certified Flight Instructor, or CFI, is named Robert Moreno, and according to this memo, written 6 months after the accident, he told the NTSB about this conversation he had with John Jr. on the morning of the day he died. This is real live drama, eh? You offer to fly with someone of JFK Jr.'s stature, and he turns down your offer of help, and then he crashes. Wow. That would be hard to live with, don't you think? Hard to keep to yourself. Man, you would want to right away pick up the phone and tell your mom. You would tell your best friend right away. It would weigh so hard on you that you would tell strangers standing next to you waiting for the bus. And he probably did, right? But you know the government, they take 6 months to do the paperwork after a trip to the bathroom. They probably took 6 months to get around to asking this guy, right? No, they talked to him on July 21st, 5 days after the accident. It seems to have been a long interview, plenty of time and opportunity for this flight instructor, Moreno, to mention this conversation he had with John. But maybe the issue of John flying alone never came up. No, it seems that they talked about that and how John never did fly alone. Well, maybe for some inexplicable reason, Moreno somehow forgot to bring up the conversation he had with John that morning. For some reason, he just didn't think of it. No, it seems that's not going to get it either. You see, this letter, written just 5 days after the crash, tells us that the only reason for Moreno not to have mentioned during his NTSB interview that he had had this conversation with John is that he had already brought up this last conversation the morning of the flight in this letter and had nothing new to add. Only he failed to mention one thing in this letter. Where's the part about John saying he wanted to do it alone?
Hi.
Hi. I don't see it. I can't explain it. So I called Moreno. I said, you know, your lawyer says that he spoke with me and that he asked you